breaking of bread, and to fellowship. That big word in Greek is koinonia. Remember? That's the four foundations of what we know the church was. That was important to them to be church. And then we get into Acts chapter 3, and we get to hear a little bit about his missionary trip. But Acts 20, verse 3, somebody wants to start reading right there.
There he spent 3 months. When a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail for Syria.
Where was there, by the way? Just so you know, it's from Greece and Corinth area. Athens and Corinth are really, really close to each other. Athens, what was going on in Athens, in the city? You remember Mars Hill? Who knows what Mars Hill is? Who doesn't know what Mars Hill is? Who wants to know what Mars Hill is? If you ever get a chance to go to Athens, Greece, and you want to go up to the Parthenon, halfway up, they'll say, okay, that's Mars Hill, and they'll keep on going. But if you stop and you walk to the side and you stand on this big rock, you can look out. And what do you look out over?
Statues.
Well, yeah, statues, and it's down the whole city. The old ancient city was down there, and it's on Mars Hill where Paul knew all the Epicureanism, all the philosophers, and all those who were really, really wise would gather and talk about, oh yes, the temple to Apollos and the great this and all these different religions. And they had a religion that they would worship the God of the unknown. And Paul, in his wisdom, as they were discussing all this stuff, Paul said, I know who the God is. And they're like, you do? Let's talk about this. And he told them who the God of the unknown is, and he explained Christ and what that was all about. And in Corinth, what kind of area was Corinth? Paul wrote a couple letters to the Corinthians. We know 1 Corinthians 13 really well, right? We've talked about this. Though I speak of tongues and of men and of angels and have not love, I become as a sounding gong or a clanging cymbal. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1. Remember these talk, though I speak of all these languages but don't have love, it's just a clanging gong. Well, there were 13 temples to false gods that were in Corinth. Corinth has a little isthmus, kind of like a little, a little water inlet way where the ship guys, sailors get a bad reputation. I don't care how old they are, right? And they would get off the boat, and then the slaves would pull the boat through that so they could get back going on the sea, but they'd spend days there in Corinth. And one of the practices of the false gods was having sexual relations with the temple prostitutes. And if you've ever been there and you looked up on the hill, you see this huge, massive structure. That's where the temple prostitutes were. And so how did the temple prostitutes know to come down? Though I speak of tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I become as a clanging gong or a clashing cymbal. No better than temple prostitutes. So Paul had spent 3 months there talking with the people that were there before he gets to what we're talking about right now. Tracy, keep going. Don't get me off track again.
When a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail for Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. So Peter the Berean, son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him.
Who's this?
So Peter the Berean.
Okay.
And of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus.
So how many Thessalonians are with him?
2.
2.
And Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy, and the Asians, Tychicus and Trophimus.
And they were from Ephesus.
They went on ahead and were waiting for us at Troas.
But guess where there's no representation of? Where did you just spend 3 months?
The Greeks.
There's none from Corinth. Nobody's on this trip from Corinth. But we do have people on the trip that are there from Berea and from Thessalonica, from Derbe. You see where Derbe is?
Oh yeah, Asia Minor.
Derbe.
Not far from Tarsus.
So he's got a lot of people that are there, but nobody from Corinth or from Philippi. Huh. Keep going.
These went on ahead and were waiting for us at Troas, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread.
What's that all about?
Passover.
Yeah.
And in 5 days we came to them at Troas.
Where's Troas?
Asia Minor, right on the coast.
Right here.
Port town.
You see it?
Can you repeat where we're reading from?
Acts chapter 20.
20.
Started at verse 3. We're currently now are at verse, Tracy, where'd you leave off?
We were in verse 6.
Okay, keep.
And in 5 days we came to them at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. Now, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered, and a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep.
You know this story? So I don't want to hear anybody talk about how long I preach. That's all I got to say about that. Keep going.
And a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer.
And longer. Some Greek texts say it's longer and longer.
Went on and on.
And being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead.
That's why we only have one level in our sanctuary.
And no windows.
No windows. That's right, pews are padded, so at least your rear end falls asleep and not you in your head.
But Paul went down and bent over him, and taking him in his arms, said, "Do not be alarmed, for his life is in him." And when Paul had gone up and had broken bread and eaten, he conversed with them a long while.
Wait, how long?
Until daybreak.
Whoa! I don't ever want to hear you say how long my sermons are. Keep going.
And so departed.
How many of you would sit there the whole time and not fall asleep? What are you, Tychus? Can you blame him? Right? Gone, out, all night. I wonder what he was saying. That's another one of my black book answers. Paul, what was that sermon? You know, the one where you Tychus fell out the window? You talked all night? What was that about? Keep going.
And they took the youth away alive, and were not a little comforted.
All right, now, let's jump over into Thessalonians. We know a little bit about the travels, a little bit about where he was, a little bit about the coming and going. You can see in Colossae is the church of, or what letter is that? Colossians. Ephesus is the book of Ephesians. Corinth is the book of
Corinthians.
both first and second. Thessalonica, first and second Thessalonians. Philippi, Philippians. So you can see as he's traveling along, he's writing letters to the churches that he planted in these places. Sometimes he was in jail and they had converts that were in the jail because of him being there. And he's trying to encourage them. And he's got these band of people, and what are they doing? What's their objective? Why are they walking with Paul? Why are they going back to Jerusalem? They're taking a tithe back to the church. And they're representing those congregations. And they're excited to share. And they're physically, they could have sent money with Paul. But they're excited, and he wanted the church in Jerusalem to see this is the church. Look at what God's doing in the church as they were bringing their tithe to support the ministry. All right, Thessalonians. Everybody turn to 1 Thessalonians. What do we know about Thessalonians? Anything?
One of the oldest churches. They have a stone which has
Book that was ever written in the New Testament. They argue that Thessalonians would have been the first book chronologically written. Maybe somewhere between 53 and 57, somewhere in there. What had not happened when Paul wrote this letter to the church in Thessalonica? Now remember, we're in the 50s.
was he in Rome?
The destruction of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem hadn't been destroyed yet, because that wasn't until 70 AD. Okay? So it's before the destruction of Jerusalem, before a huge, what we call the diaspora, the spreading, right? The sending out. But it was Paul trying to reach these people in Thessalonians. So he writes this letter. And turn on page, let's see, what is it, 2050, if you're in your Lutheran study Bible. Can somebody read what Luther has on 1 Thessalonians? It's in the study Bible, it's on page 2050. If you have that, go ahead and read that. Out loud, please.
Just inside the door to the women's quarters.
No, just on Luther, the next paragraph down.
The next-
Luther on 1 Thessalonians.
Luther on 1 Thessalonians.
Sorry. St. Paul writes out of a special love and apostolic solicitude. For in the first 2 chapters, he praises them because they received the gospel from him with such earnestness that they remained because they received the gospel from him with oath, steadfast in it despite suffering and persecution, and became a beautiful example of faith to all congregations everywhere, and suffered persecutions from their own kinsfolk like Christ, and his apostles did from the Jews. As St. Paul, by way of example, had himself also suffered and led a holy life when he was with them. For this he thanks God that this gospel had borne such fruit among them. In chapter 3, he shows his care and solicitude that this labor of his and their praiseworthy beginning not be brought to nothing by the devil and his apostles through the doctrines of men.
So what are the doctrines of man that he's having difficulties with?
Circumcision,
Okay, that's one, but
Judgment.
about another doctrine of the time. They're
holding
Greek
feasts.
prophets, right?
Feasts, holding feasts.
Feast is one. There was a big churchy term called Epicureanism. That was eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow you may die. So don't worry about it. Go out and get drunk. Have salacious relations. It's okay. You don't know. And that was part of the common theme of the day when he was writing to the people in Thessalonica. Okay, keep going.
For this reason, he sent Timothy to them beforehand to make sure about this. And he thanks God that things were still right among them and hopes that they continue to increase.
Somebody else pick up there in chapter 4.
In chapter 4, he exhorts them to guard against sin and to do good to one another. He also answers a question which they had presented to him through Timothy concerning the resurrection of the dead.
Resurrection of the dead.
of the dead.
Yeah.